This happened around 2014 in the Appalachian Mountains of Pennsylvania. I was about 14 or 15 at the time, and honestly, I forgot about it for years, until I started looking into abductions and other paranormal encounters. That's when the memory came flooding back. Where I grew up, everybody lives tucked into the woods, and everybody hunts. I was no exception. It was October, archery season, in Bedford, Pennsylvania. I was hunting at the base of the mountain, in the swampy land my family owns. My dad was far away on the other side, trying to intercept a big buck he'd been tracking. I was alone in my climber stand, perched high in a dense patch of pines, with 2 game trails running right underneath me. It was still light out, just starting to dim, the kind of twilight where you can see a flashlight beam, but don't quite need one yet. I was facing the mountainside, so thick branches blocked most of the sky. Then I heard it, the crackle of leaves. Suddenly, 5 or 6 deer burst out of the pine saplings right in front of me, sprinting full speed past my stand, and straight up the mountain. They came out of nowhere, no warning, no buildup, just panic. And then everything changed. A massive LED bright light flashed above me, filling the sky between the treetops. It was blue, cold, and electric, and it covered the tops of 3 or 4 full-grown pines. It was there for just a split second, and then it was gone. But the moment the light disappeared, everything went dark. Not normal dusk dark, pitch black. A second earlier, I could see my bow's reflective sight. Now, I couldn't see anything. It was like the sun had just switched off the moment it dipped behind the mountain. I sat there in the stand, stunned, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. 10 minutes later, my dad rolled up the road on his side-by-side, and I climbed down, still shaken, but not really understanding why. It wasn't until the next day that things got strange. I woke up with what I thought was a cold sore in my left eyelid. Annoying, but not unusual for me. I got ready, went to school, and by lunchtime, I had a pretty bad headache. A lunch lady who knew me stopped dead when she saw me. The right side of my head was swollen, badly, puffed out almost half an inch. She told me to get to the nurse's office immediately. The nurse took one look at me and called my mom. She was worried it might be shingles, as one of our teachers had just had an outbreak. At the doctor's office, he shrugged it off as some sort of poison exposure from the woods. But I know my area. There's no poison oak around there, and poison ivy doesn't affect me. The swelling went down over the next couple of days, and the whole thing faded from my mind. Years passed, and life went on. Then, this past summer, I had my first episode of sleep paralysis, and that sent me spiraling back into researching the paranormal. Abductions, Mothman sightings, all of it. And suddenly, that night in the tree stand didn't feel so random anymore. The bright flash, the deer appearing without warning, the sudden darkness, the lost stretch of time I can't fully account for, and the weird physical symptoms the next day. I still don't remember seeing anything directly. No nightmares, no obvious missing time, nothing dramatic like that. But something happened up there in that stand. Something that I still can't explain. I go to a university in Asheville, North Carolina, and in my freshman year, I went camping a couple of times with some close friends. We always went to the same campsite, by the French Broad River, pretty cheap and tucked away in the trees. This particular mid-November camping trip was like the first couple. We loaded up on supplies and piled into my friend Jacob's truck to go to the campsite. We set up our tent sometime around dusk, ate food, and dicked around for a while, and finally went to bed after midnight. I woke up sometime before dawn, and I had to pee. I bundled up in a second sweater, because late fall nights can get very chilly here, and went outside to do my business. When I say that our campsite was right next to the river, I mean it was right next to the river, less than 20 feet from the edge of the water. So, I decided to pop a squat behind a tree on the riverbank and look at the water while I whiz. I was still pretty drowsy at this point, and the cold wasn't doing much to wake me up. I was just gazing out at the river, eyes almost glazed over, when I spotted something. A figure was standing in the middle of the freezing cold French Broad River at 3 in the fucking morning. I'm pretty sure my pee stream retracted back up into me. The moonlight was fairly bright, but I knew that sleepy eyes can play tricks on you. I squinted my eyes and winded them as far as they'd go, shielded them, and everything. It was definitely a person about halfway across the river, standing waist deep in the running water. I couldn't tell in the dark, but I'm sure it was facing our camp. I don't know what gender it was, but the moonlight that reflected off of it was pale enough to make me think that it wasn't wearing any clothes. Once my brain was fully awake and processing that there was a person staring at me from the freezing river, I hiked my pants up and proceeded to wake up my friends and tell them what I'd just seen. We all looked out the tent, and sure enough, river person is still standing there, completely fucking still. We huddled back into the tent to figure out what we were going to do, and eventually packed up our shit and left before sunrise. River person was there and watching us do it the whole time. Not my own story, but it was told to me by a coworker who I trust and respect. This man is an outdoorsman and not prone to hyperbole or any kind of nonsense. This took place in East Tennessee in the 90s or early 2000s, as far as I know. He's parked in his truck in a state forest area with this girl late at night. They drank a few beers, so take it as you will. It's a clear night in the wintertime, so there's no undergrowth. There's rolling hills and hardwood forests with leaf cover on the ground. It was a clear night with lots of moonlight. I don't remember if he said he heard something or if he just saw it, but suddenly he saw this werewolf-type creature running through the trees and up the hill. It was large, tall, and bipedal. It was silhouetted by the moonlight on the ridgeline, and he and the girl hightailed it out of there in the truck. If you're familiar with stories of the Dogman, it sounds like this is what he said he saw. I know there's more to the story, but that's all I can remember. I've hiked through this area myself dozens of times in the daytime, and I've never seen anything, but it's a pretty desolate section of forest that something like this could have freedom to move through without much trouble from people. And this is probably the strangest, possibly paranormal thing that's ever happened to me. I grew up in East Tennessee. My dad's backyard wasn't really a yard. It was a steep hillside that climbed straight up into a patch of woods. A narrow trail ran from our property into those woods, and if you followed it long enough, it would spit you out near a children's home on the other side. My childhood friend and I spent half our lives in those woods, running around, playing pretend, and going on adventures. On one of those afternoons, we saw something. It was in a tree. Now, these weren't climbable trees. These were tall, straight trunks with almost no low branches. Whatever we saw was way up there, high enough that, for a moment, we thought maybe it was a bear cub coming down the trunk. We froze and watched. This thing was climbing down backwards, circling the trunk as it descended. That caught our attention immediately, because even a bear cub coming down a tree in the middle of town would have been rare, but not impossible. So we just stood there, curious and terrified at the same time. But as it got lower, we both realized that was not a bear cub. It came all the way down until it was maybe 10 meters from us, and we got a good look at it. Solid gray, not a bear, not a bobcat, and bobcats didn't come this close to town anyway. Plus, it was broad daylight. We stared at it, and it stared back at us. And that was enough. We took off running straight back to the house, hearts pounding, not stopping until we slammed the screen door behind us. To this day, I have no idea what it was. The Wampus Cat is a regional legend, and that crossed my mind even then. But honestly, I still don't know. Whatever it was, it didn't match anything we'd ever seen in those woods before or since. My father grew up in the Appalachian Mountains of Tennessee, right in the Smokies. When he was a kid, there was this local legend. If you started walking from the peak of the mountain at dusk, a ghost would follow you from the very first curve, all the way down to the base. One evening, he and his 4 siblings decided to test the story. At dusk, they set out from the peak. As soon as they rounded the first bend, they heard it. Footsteps in the leaves, just inside the tree line beside them. They froze, and so did the footsteps. They looked around, but saw nothing. So, they started walking again, and the steps started too, matching their pace. They stopped once more, gathered their courage, and sent 2 of the older kids into the woods to check. But no one was there. They continued down the trail, and again the crunching footsteps began beside them, slow and steady, keeping perfect stride. That was enough. They all bolted, sprinting the rest of the quarter-mile home. When they burst through the door, breathless and terrified, they told their father what had happened. He listened quietly, then told them that years earlier, a man had fallen to his death at an old quarry near the top of the mountain. And ever since, people said he never stopped walking. I love the woods. The mountains feel like home to me, but there are some hollers you just don't go into. Bad blood, bad earth, something. They're just not places for people. There was one of those hollers right next to the one my family settled in. The trees there always looked darker, the air felt colder, and at night, you'd hear noises that didn't belong to any animal that we knew. One summer, we were camping on family land by the creek. I was with my older cousins. They lived to scare me, and I loved being scared, but I never fully believed anything they said, because they were always playing pranks or jumping out to scare me. It was late. The fire had died down. We only kept it going for light anyway. The night had that cool July chill, comfortable but a little crisp. I needed to pee, so I steeled myself, figuring one of the boys would hear me move and try to mess with me. I slipped out of the tent as quietly as I could and walked a little ways off behind a tree. After I went, I stood up and looked around under the full moon, checking for one of my cousins so he didn't sneak up and scare me. And that's when I noticed it. I was shivering and I could see my breath, and all I could think about was that holler. On my way back, I saw what I thought was my cousin hunched behind a tree, waiting on me. So I decided to outfox him. I circled around, built up a little courage, even though something in me was starting to feel wrong, and then I ran up and jumped on it. The thing that turned around let out a sound I'd never heard in my life, and then it jumped straight into the tree. And this wasn't just some sapling. It vaulted straight up into a high branch, like nothing human could. I ran, full sprint, screaming bloody murder. I didn't stop at the tent, didn't look back. I just tore through the dark all the way to the house like something was chasing me, because I was sure it was. When I burst inside, my great-grandmother was already halfway dressed to come outside, looking more worried than I'd ever seen her. She was muttering about her wards and something crossing. When she saw me, she nearly fell over, asking where the boys were. Just then, the boys crashed through the door behind me, pale as ghosts. They told us that after they heard me scream, they figured it was just me being 10 and maybe a bobcat got too close. But then, the tree next to the tent started shaking. Limbs were snapping, branches were being thrown. Then they heard growling, and then screaming, and then heavy running down the ridge behind them. And that ridge led straight to the bad holler. And that was enough for them, and they ran. Our grandmother prayed over us and wouldn't let us back outside until morning. When we finally went to check the campfire, our tent had been shredded and tossed onto the old fire pit. Nothing was usable. We never camped out there again. My grandma spent the entire day hiking that ridge, stopping every so often to bury something in the ground. When I asked her what she was doing, she said she was setting our perimeter, her wards, so nothing could cross without warning her. That's why she'd been getting dressed the second she heard me scream. I never found out what those things were. My grandma called them banshees, and she thought it was hilarious that I'd managed to jump scare one straight up into a tree. I live in the Appalachian Mountains, and this happened right in my own front yard. It was early fall, back in 2014. I was outside with my dog, letting him finish up before bed, when I noticed something moved near this old well. I brushed it off at first. A couple of minutes later, though, I saw what looked like dog-like legs moving between my vehicles, no more than 5 feet from me. Thinking it was just a stray, I yelled for it to get out of the yard. But it didn't run. Instead, it stopped and turned its head the way a horse does. That's when I saw them. 2 glowing yellow eyes, each the size of a dinner plate. And its head was high, just below the power lines. It had to be at least 9 feet tall. My dog looked up at the same moment and started growling and barking in a way I had never heard him before or since. And that's the only reason I knew I wasn't imagining it. After a long, tense minute, the thing simply turned and walked back into the dark the same way it came. I've never seen it again. If anyone has any explanation for what this creature could have been, I'm all ears.